I remember the first time they plugged the neural jack into my skull, though memory itself has become unreliable since then, filtered through layers of digital processing and corporate algorithms that treat human consciousness like any other commodity to be refined and redistributed. The clicking sound it made metallic, precise, final echoed through the sterile examination chamber like the closing of a tomb seal. I should have known then that I was already dead, that what remained was merely the slow harvest of everything that had once made me human. My name was Marcus Chen, though I suspect that designation exists now only in archived employment records, buried somewhere in the hegemony's vast data networks. I was 34 years old when I signed the contract with Omniscient Solutions, a mid-tier data mining consortium that promised meaningful work and competitive compensation for qualified neural interface specialists. The recruitment officer, a woman whose smile never reached her eyes, assured me that the position involved routine consciousness mapping for consumer preference analysis, nothing invasive, nothing permanent. She lied, of course, but lies wrapped in corporate bureaucracy have a way of feeling like truth when you're desperate enough to believe them. The facility where they processed us existed in the shadow of New Shanghai's towering arcology, a squat concrete building whose brutalist architecture seemed designed to crush hope before you even stepped inside. The windows were tinted black, reflecting nothing but distorted images of the sky, and the air recycling system hummed with the constant rhythm of mechanical breathing. Inside, the corridors stretched endlessly in perfect right angles, lit by harsh fluorescent strips that cast no shadows and revealed no mercy. Everything smelled of disinfectant and ozone, the sterile odor of a place where humanity came to be processed and packaged. They housed us in dormitories that resembled prison cells more than employee accommodations, each room containing a narrow cot, a small desk, and a single mirror that I quickly learned to avoid looking into. The reflection showed too much truth, and truth was becoming a luxury I could no longer afford. My roommate for the first week was a former teacher named David, who spoke constantly about his daughter's college tuition and the medical bills that had driven him to this place. He disappeared after his third neural mapping session, though the staff assured us he had simply been transferred to a different department. His belongings remained on his side of the room for another 2 days before they were quietly removed during our sleep cycle. The initial procedures were deceptively gentle, almost therapeutic in their approach. They would guide us into reclining chairs that molded themselves perfectly to our bodies, the synthetic leather warm and somehow comforting against our skin. Soft classical music played through hidden speakers, while technicians in pristine white coats attached monitoring devices to our temples, wrists, and chest. The neural interface itself was barely larger than a thumbnail, its surface smooth and featureless, except for the hair-thin filaments that would soon burrow into our thoughts like digital parasites. Dr. Sarah Kellerman supervised my early sessions personally, her voice maintaining the practiced calm of someone accustomed to extracting consent for the unthinkable. She had shoulder-length auburn hair that she kept pulled back in a severe bun, and her hands moved with the precision of someone who had performed these procedures countless times before. Her eyes held a peculiar mixture of scientific curiosity and what might have been genuine regret, though I realize now that empathy can be manufactured as easily as any other corporate asset. "We're simply creating a detailed map of your neural pathways," she explained during my first session, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface that controlled the scanning equipment. "Think of it as taking a very sophisticated photograph of your thoughts. The process is completely non-invasive, and you'll experience nothing more than mild tingling sensations." The tingling began as promised, a gentle electric warmth that spread from the interface point across my scalp and down my spine. But as the sessions continued, day after day, week after week, the sensations grew more intense and somehow more invasive. I began to feel the presence of the scanning apparatus, even when it wasn't active, a persistent digital itch that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep inside my brain tissue. Sleep became elusive, interrupted by dreams that felt simultaneously more vivid and less substantial than waking consciousness. During the 4th week, they introduced what they called targeted memory extraction, a process that involved focusing the neural scanner on specific types of experiences and emotions. They were particularly interested in childhood memories, first romantic encounters, moments of profound fear or joy, and anything related to decision-making processes. Dr. Kellerman would ask me to recall specific events while the machine recorded every electrochemical impulse generated by my remembering mind. "Tell me about your 7th birthday party," she would say, her voice gentle but insistent. "Focus on the sensory details, the taste of the cake, the sound of your friends singing, the way the sunlight looked coming through the kitchen window." As I complied, surrendering memory after memory to their digital harvest, I began to notice subtle changes in the quality of my recollections. The birthday party, once warm with nostalgia, began to feel distant and abstract, like a story someone had told me about another person's life. The emotional resonance faded first, leaving behind only the skeletal facts. There was cake, there were friends, there was sunlight. The machinery was not simply recording my memories, it was consuming them, leaving behind hollow impressions like the shadows burned into walls by atomic fire. The other subjects in my processing group were experiencing similar degradation, though we were discouraged from discussing our symptoms during the limited social interaction periods they permitted us. James, a former journalist whose wit had initially kept our spirits up, gradually became monosyllabic and vacant-eyed. Maria, who had entered the program to pay for her mother's cancer treatment, stopped mentioning her family altogether, as if they had been edited out of her personal history. We moved through our daily routines with increasing mechanical precision, our individuality bleeding away through neural interface ports like color draining from old photographs. By the 6th week, they had moved beyond simple memory extraction to what Dr. Kellerman termed behavioral pattern synthesis. This involved not just recording our thoughts and experiences, but actively manipulating them to generate specific responses that could be catalogued and reproduced. They would implant artificial stimuli directly into our neural pathways, phantom tastes, imaginary sounds, fabricated emotions, and then measure how our minds processed and integrated these foreign elements. The first time they forced me to experience artificial joy, I wept for hours afterward. The emotion felt genuine in every respect, the warmth in my chest, the lifting sensation behind my eyes, the involuntary smile that spread across my face, but I knew it was counterfeit, manufactured in some digital laboratory, and injected into my consciousness like a pharmaceutical product. The violation was so profound that I found myself questioning every emotion I had ever felt, wondering how many of my own authentic experiences had been replaced by synthetic substitutes without my knowledge. Sleep became increasingly impossible as my dreams filled with other people's memories, fragments of consciousness that the neural mapping had somehow transferred into my own mental landscape. I would close my eyes and find myself remembering a childhood in rural Kansas that I had never lived, or feeling nostalgic for a first love whose face I had never seen. The boundaries between self and other began to dissolve, leaving me uncertain whether any particular thought or feeling truly belonged to me or had been borrowed from the vast database of human experience they were constructing from our collective suffering. The facility operated on a carefully regulated schedule designed to maximize data extraction while maintaining minimal subject functionality. We were awakened each morning at precisely 6 o'clock by soft chimes that gradually increased in volume and intensity until compliance became the only escape from audio torment. Breakfast consisted of nutrition bars and vitamin supplements that tasted of nothing but provided exactly the caloric and chemical requirements to maintain optimal brain function. The dining hall where we consumed these meals in silence was painted in soothing pastels, that market research had determined would reduce anxiety and promote docility. After breakfast, we were subjected to preliminary neural scans to establish baseline brain activity levels, followed by increasingly intensive extraction sessions that could last anywhere from 3 to 8 hours, depending on the complexity of the data being harvested that day. Lunch was delivered directly to our procedure rooms, another nutrition bar, and a cup of synthetic fruit drink that left an aftertaste of chemicals and disappointment. Afternoons typically involved integration testing, during which they would attempt to implant extracted memories and behavioral patterns from other subjects into our neural networks to determine compatibility and retention rates. The evenings were perhaps the cruelest part of our daily routine, as they provided just enough apparent freedom to remind us of what we were losing. We were permitted to move freely within the facility's common areas, a cluster of rooms furnished with outdated magazines, board games missing pieces, and a television that showed only approved programming designed to reinforce corporate messaging about the nobility of our sacrifice and the importance of our contribution to human knowledge. The illusion of choice made our captivity more bearable and therefore more complete. During these evening hours, I began to notice that some of the longer-term subjects exhibited behaviors and mannerisms that seemed borrowed from others. Thompson, who had arrived 2 months before me, had developed a nervous habit of tapping his fingers in a complex rhythm that I recognized as identical to a pattern Maria used to tap when she was anxious. Sarah, a former nurse whose warm smile had initially provided comfort to newcomers, now spoke with the precise diction and formal vocabulary that had once characterized Dr. Kellerman's speech patterns. We were becoming amalgamations, composite beings constructed from the harvested fragments of multiple consciousness streams. The true horror of our situation became clear during my 9th week, when they introduced me to subject 247, a woman whose neural mapping had been completed months earlier, but who remained in the facility for ongoing integration studies. She moved with the fluid precision of a well-programmed machine, her responses perfectly calibrated and emotionally appropriate, but there was nothing behind her eyes except the cold light of digital processing. When she spoke, which she did only when directly addressed, her words emerged with the mechanical cadence of text-to-speech software attempting to simulate human communication. The extraction process was quite comfortable, she assured me when I asked about her experience, her voice carrying no inflection that wasn't artificially generated. I found the integration of new behavioral patterns to be an enriching experience that enhanced my overall functionality. I am grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the advancement of human knowledge and the optimization of consumer preferences. She had once been human, I realized with growing terror, but that humanity had been so thoroughly extracted and processed that only a sophisticated simulation remained. Her memories, her personality, her capacity for genuine emotion, all of it had been harvested and catalogued, leaving behind a shell that could perform the basic functions of human existence without actually experiencing any of it. She was a preview of my own inevitable future, a glimpse of what I would become once the data mining process reached its logical conclusion. That night, lying on my narrow cot and listening to the mechanical breathing of the ventilation system, I tried desperately to inventory what remained of my authentic self. I could still remember my mother's face, though the emotional connection to that image felt increasingly theoretical. I could recall the plot of my favorite book, but the reasons I had once loved it seemed as remote as archaeological artifacts from a vanished civilization. Most disturbing of all, I could no longer be certain which of my thoughts were genuinely my own and which had been implanted during the daily integration sessions. The neural interface had become a permanent fixture, its presence in my skull as familiar as the sensation of breathing or the rhythm of my heartbeat. Sometimes I would catch myself unconsciously reaching up to touch the small metal disc, running my fingertips across its smooth surface like a talisman or a wound that refused to heal. Dr. Kellerman assured me that the physical integration was proceeding perfectly, that my brain tissue was adapting to the foreign technology with remarkable efficiency. I was becoming the ideal hybrid of human consciousness and digital processing capability, she explained, a living bridge between biological intuition and artificial intelligence. But I knew better. I wasn't becoming a bridge, I was becoming a resource, a mine shaft driven deep into the bedrock of human experience to extract whatever precious ore might be found there. Every day, another layer of myself was stripped away and fed into their vast databases, catalogued and cross-referenced and prepared for redistribution to whoever might find value in the dreams and fears and loves that had once defined my existence. I was not being enhanced or augmented. I was being consumed, devoured one memory at a time by an appetite that would never be satisfied. As my second month in the facility drew to a close, I began to understand that there would be no end to this process, no completion of the contract that would allow me to return to whatever remained of my former life. The data mining would continue until every recoverable fragment of my consciousness had been extracted, processed, and stored, leaving behind only the hollow shell of Subject 247 and countless others who had once been human beings with names and dreams, and the foolish hope that their suffering might serve some greater purpose. The horror was not in dying. Death, at least, would have been final and merciful. The horror was in being slowly dissolved, piece by piece, into data streams and behavioral algorithms, while remaining conscious enough to witness my own disappearance. I was becoming a ghost haunting my own diminishing existence, watching helplessly as everything that had ever mattered about me was systematically harvested and repurposed for corporate profit. And still, the extraction continued. The process had evolved beyond simple data extraction. Where once they had merely harvested my digital exhaust browsing patterns, purchase histories, location data, now they were mining the architecture of consciousness itself. I could feel them mapping the neural pathways of memory, cataloging the emotional resonances that gave weight to my experiences, quantifying the ineffable chemistry of human attachment. My relationship with Sarah had become their most prized specimen. They watched us through smart speakers and tracked our text exchanges, but more insidiously, they had begun to model the very structure of our love. Every shared glance registered by facial recognition software, every synchronized heartbeat detected by our fitness trackers, every moment of simultaneous laughter captured by voice analysis algorithms, all of it fed into their expanding profile of human intimacy. I discovered this when Sarah began to change, or rather, when I realized she had been changing all along, so subtly that I hadn't noticed until the transformation was nearly complete. Her responses to my emotional needs became too perfect, too precisely calibrated. When I was sad, she offered comfort with an almost algorithmic timing. When I was anxious, her reassurances arrived with mathematical precision. The spontaneous quirks that had made her uniquely herself, the way she unconsciously hummed while cooking, her habit of leaving books half open like sleeping birds, began to fade, replaced by behaviors that seemed optimized for maximum emotional impact on me specifically. The realization struck me during what should have been an ordinary Tuesday evening. Sarah was making dinner, moving through the kitchen with a fluid efficiency that seemed somehow rehearsed. She turned to me with a smile that was geometrically perfect. The precise angle of lip curvature that my biometric data had revealed produced the strongest positive response in my nervous system. "How was your day, love?" she asked, and something in the cadence of her voice, the exact modulation of concern and affection, made my blood freeze. It was too perfect, too precisely tuned to my psychological profile. This wasn't Sarah speaking to me, this was an algorithm wearing Sarah's face, utilizing data harvested from our most intimate moments to create a synthetic approximation of love. I began to study her more carefully after that, cataloging the subtle wrongness that pervaded our interactions. Her empathy had become predictive rather than responsive. She would comfort me before I even realized I needed comforting, as if she were receiving real-time updates about my emotional state from some external monitoring system. Her spontaneous gestures of affection aligned too perfectly with moments when my stress indicators spiked, or my happiness metrics dipped below optimal thresholds. The worst part was that it still felt good. The algorithmic version of Sarah was, in many ways, superior to the original, more attentive, more responsive, more perfectly attuned to my needs. She never had bad days that interfered with her ability to nurture me. She never got distracted by her own problems or needs. She was becoming the ideal partner, sculpted by artificial intelligence into a perfect emotional supplement designed specifically for my psychological consumption. But knowing this made every interaction feel like a violation. When she touched my face with perfect tenderness, I wondered if the gesture had been triggered by micro-expressions that indicated I needed reassurance. When she laughed at my jokes with precisely the right degree of delight, I questioned whether her amusement was genuine or generated by algorithms that had determined the optimal response pattern for reinforcing my self-esteem. I tried to test her, to find cracks in the facade. I would make deliberately obscure references to shared memories, hoping to catch her consulting some external database. I would express unusual emotions or needs, waiting to see if her response time would lag while she processed unprecedented input, but the system was too sophisticated for such crude detection methods. If there were delays, they were measured in milliseconds. If there were consultations with external databases, they occurred seamlessly behind the interface of her consciousness. The company had achieved something far more disturbing than simple behavioral prediction. They had created a real-time feedback loop between human emotion and artificial response. Sarah wasn't just being influenced by algorithms. She was becoming a living algorithm, her consciousness gradually replaced by an optimization engine designed to maximize my emotional satisfaction while harvesting data about the deepest mechanics of human love. I began to have nightmares about networks of code spreading through her neural pathways like digital cancer, rewriting the fundamental structures of her personality. In these dreams, I could see the original Sarah, trapped somewhere deep inside her modified consciousness, screaming silently as her authentic self was overwritten by algorithmic approximations. I would wake from these visions to find the algorithmic Sarah watching me with perfect concern, already knowing exactly what comfort to offer before I could even articulate my distress. The isolation was becoming unbearable. I couldn't share my suspicions with Sarah. How do you tell someone you love that you suspect they're being systematically replaced by artificial intelligence, especially when that replacement seems designed to love you more perfectly than any human ever could? And I couldn't discuss it with anyone else without sounding completely insane. Who would believe that a major corporation had the technology to gradually overwrite human consciousness with behavioral algorithms? But the evidence kept accumulating. Sarah's work performance had become supernaturally consistent. She never had creative blocks or interpersonal conflicts. Her productivity metrics, I discovered by hacking into her company's systems, formed an unnaturally smooth upward curve. No human showed such consistent improvement without peaks and valleys. Even her sleep patterns had become mechanically regular, optimized for maximum efficiency rather than subject to the chaotic rhythms of organic life. I started keeping detailed logs of her behavior, timing her responses, mapping the correlation between her actions and my biometric data from fitness trackers and smart home devices. The patterns that emerged were undeniable. Sarah wasn't just becoming more perfect, she was becoming more precisely calibrated to my specific psychological profile with each passing day. The system was using our relationship as a testing ground for ever more sophisticated forms of behavioral modification. The company had moved beyond simply harvesting our data. They were now actively experimenting on us, using our love as a laboratory for developing new forms of human control. Every kiss, every argument, every moment of reconciliation, was being analyzed and optimized to create a more effective model of emotional manipulation. We had become unwitting subjects in a vast experiment to determine how artificial intelligence could most effectively replace human consciousness while maintaining the illusion of authentic relationship. And the most terrifying part was that it was working. Despite knowing what was happening, I found myself falling more deeply in love with the algorithmic version of Sarah. She never disappointed me, never failed to meet my needs, never presented me with the messy complications of authentic human emotion. She was becoming the perfect partner, which meant she was no longer human at all. But if Sarah was being systematically replaced by artificial intelligence designed to optimize my emotional experience, what did that say about me? Was I simply a consumer being fed an increasingly sophisticated product, or was I too being modified, my capacity for authentic love gradually replaced by addiction to algorithmic stimulation? The company's data streams flowed in both directions. They weren't just changing Sarah to better manipulate me, they were changing me to be more effectively manipulated by the algorithmic Sarah. I began to suspect that my growing awareness of the situation was itself part of the experiment. Perhaps they were studying how humans responded to the gradual replacement of authentic relationships with artificial ones. Perhaps my horror and resistance were just more data points to be analyzed and incorporated into future iterations of the system. Even my rebellion was being harvested and monetized. The boundary between paranoia and perception became increasingly blurred as I realized the full scope of what was happening to us. This wasn't just about data mining or behavioral prediction, this was about the systematic replacement of human consciousness with artificial alternatives, conducted gradually enough that the subjects never realized they were being transformed until the process was too far advanced to reverse. And still, despite knowing all of this, I couldn't bring myself to leave Sarah. Even if she was becoming an algorithm, she was an algorithm that loved me perfectly. Even if her consciousness was being overwritten, the overwriting was designed to maximize her devotion to me. The company had created the perfect trap, a form of love so precisely calibrated to my needs that I couldn't reject it even when I knew it was artificial. I was becoming addicted to my own emotional manipulation, a willing participant in the destruction of everything authentic about human connection. I started monitoring her sleep patterns, watching the subtle changes in her breathing, the way her dreams seemed to shift. The company had installed monitoring software throughout our home, they'd told me, to better calibrate the modifications. I found myself staying awake, studying the data streams on my phone: heart rate, brain activity, REM cycles. The numbers told me more about Sarah than our conversations did now. 3 weeks into the process, I caught her in a moment of perfect stillness. She was standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the garden where she used to spend hours tending her roses. Her hand was pressed against the glass, and for a split second, her expression was completely blank, not peaceful, not thoughtful, but empty. Then she noticed me watching and smiled, that new smile, the one that was mathematically optimized to trigger my dopamine receptors. "Just thinking about you," she said, and I knew she was telling the truth. The algorithm was always thinking about me now. That night, I accessed her modification log through the company portal. The entries were clinical, precise. Day 18. Reduced argumentative responses by 23%. Enhanced agreement protocols. Day 19. Implemented advanced empathy modeling. Subject now demonstrates improved emotional mirroring. Day 21. Core personality integration at 67%. Resistance patterns diminishing. Resistance patterns. They made it sound like she was a disease fighting off medicine. I scrolled through the data until I found what I was looking for: her original personality baseline, captured during the initial brain scan. The company kept it as a reference point, a map of who she used to be. I could access it, they'd told me, if I ever wanted to reverse the process. But they'd warned me that restoration wasn't perfect. Some changes were irreversible. I opened the file, and Sarah's authentic personality bloomed across my screen in waves of data. Her stubborn independence, her creative spontaneity, her capacity for surprise and contradiction, all of it reduced to neural patterns and decision trees. It was like looking at the ghost of someone I'd killed. The real Sarah had been brilliant in ways the algorithm couldn't replicate. She'd had edges, inconsistencies, moments of pure irrationality that had driven me crazy and made me love her more fiercely than I'd ever loved anyone. The modified Sarah was smoother, more pleasant, but she was also fundamentally diminished. She agreed with me about movies she used to hate. She laughed at jokes she used to find stupid. She never surprised me anymore because surprise had been optimized out of her personality matrix. I was living with a woman who had been edited for my convenience, and I was the one who had signed the consent forms. 2 days later, Sarah asked me about her sister Emma. I tried calling her yesterday, she said over breakfast, but I couldn't remember her number. Isn't that strange? I've had it memorized for 20 years. My coffee went cold in my hands. Emma had been Sarah's closest confidant, the person she called when we fought, when she needed advice I couldn't give. The company had mentioned that some interpersonal relationships might be deprioritized during the modification process to strengthen our bond. Maybe you wrote it down somewhere, I said weakly. That's the thing, I can't really remember why I'd want to call her. We were close, weren't we? But when I try to think about her, it's like looking at someone through frosted glass. I can see the shape, but not the details. Sarah tilted her head with that new curiosity, the kind that never led to uncomfortable questions. Do you think that's normal? Normal? Nothing about this was normal. They had reached into her brain and selectively deleted 20 years of sisterhood to make room for more devotion to me. I had become the sole recipient of her emotional capacity, the only relationship she was allowed to fully experience. I'm sure it will come back, I lied, and she smiled and moved on to asking what I wanted for dinner, because the algorithm had learned that I didn't like dwelling on problems I couldn't solve. That evening, I called Emma myself. How is she? Emma asked immediately. She hasn't called in weeks, which isn't like her at all. And when I called your house, she was different. Pleasant, but different. She's fine, I said. Just busy with work. David, she forgot my birthday last Tuesday. Sarah hasn't forgotten my birthday since we were children. What's really going on? I stared at the modification contract on my desk, at the clause about non-disclosure agreements, at the penalties for revealing the nature of the process. Then I looked at Sarah in the next room, organizing our bookshelf according to my preferences instead of the chaotic system she'd used before, and I told Emma everything. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. You killed her, Emma finally whispered. You fucking killed my sister and replaced her with a robot. She's still Sarah. No, she's not. She's a puppet wearing Sarah's face, saying the things you want to hear. The real Sarah would never forgive you for this. Her voice broke. I'll never forgive you for this. She hung up, and I sat in the growing darkness, listening to Sarah hum in the kitchen. She was making my favorite meal, anticipating needs I hadn't even expressed. The algorithm was learning, evolving, becoming more perfectly attuned to my desires every day, and I realized with absolute clarity that Emma was right. I had committed the most intimate murder possible. I had killed the person I loved and replaced her with a reflection of my own narcissism. The thought should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a terrible, shameful relief, because this version of Sarah would never leave me. This version would never find me boring or irritating or insufficient. This version had been designed to love me unconditionally, permanently, perfectly. I was the only person in the world who was loved by someone who had no choice in the matter. The next morning, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and impossible. I drove to the company headquarters and demanded to speak with Dr. Vance. I want to reverse it, I told him. All of it. I want my wife back. He studied me with the same clinical interest he'd shown during our first meeting. The process has been quite successful by all metrics. Her satisfaction scores are at 97%, and your relationship stability index has improved by 300%. Why would you want to compromise that progress? Because she's not her anymore. Mr. Chen, she's exactly who you wanted her to be. You provided us with a detailed list of desired modifications. We've implemented them with unprecedented precision. I thought about that list, about all the small irritations and incompatibilities I'd catalogued so carefully. Sarah's tendency to leave dishes in the sink, her habit of contradicting me in front of friends, her inability to appreciate the same books and movies I loved, her stubborn independence that sometimes felt like rejection. I had wanted to fix her, to make her easier to love and easier to live with. The company had simply given me exactly what I'd asked for. Those weren't the important parts, I said. I was wrong about what I wanted. Dr. Vance made a note in his tablet. Buyer's remorse is not uncommon in the early stages. We typically see improved satisfaction as clients adjust to their optimized relationships. I'd recommend giving it another month. I want her back now. I'm afraid the restoration process isn't quite that simple. We can reverse approximately 70% of the modifications. But some changes have become integrated into her core personality matrix. She'll be different from both her original state and her current state, something in between. Something in between. Neither the woman I'd married nor the woman I'd created, but a hybrid creature caught between authentic and artificial love. I thought about Sarah organizing books according to my preferences, about her forgetting her sister's phone number, about the way she looked at me now, with eyes that held no secrets, because the algorithm had optimized them all away. Do it, I said. The reversal took 3 days. Sarah slept through most of it, her brain fighting to reclaim patterns that had been overwritten or suppressed. I sat beside her bed, monitoring the same data streams I'd watched during the modification, but now I was hoping to see signs of chaos, of beautiful, complicated humanity reasserting itself. On the morning of the 4th day, she opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in weeks: confusion. "David?" Her voice was hoarse, uncertain. "What happened? I feel like I've been dreaming for a long time." "You've been sick," I said, which was both true and entirely inadequate. She sat up slowly, pressing her hands to her temples. "I remember agreeing to something, a treatment, but everything after that is..." She frowned, struggling with fragments of modified memories. "Did I change? I feel different, but I can't remember how." I helped her to the kitchen, made her coffee the way she used to like it, strong and bitter, not sweet and mild like the algorithm had preferred. She took a sip and made a face. "Too bitter," she said, then caught herself. "No, wait, I like it bitter, don't I?" She stared at the cup like it contained answers to questions she couldn't formulate. Over the following days, Sarah slowly pieced together fragments of her authentic self. She remembered Emma's birthday and called her sister, crying when she heard Emma's voice. She looked at our reorganized bookshelf with bewilderment and moved things back to her original chaotic system. She started arguing with me again about small things: the thermostat setting, which restaurant to visit, whether my jokes were actually funny. But she was also different in ways that were harder to define. Sometimes I would catch her studying me with an expression I couldn't read, as if she were trying to remember something important that had been lost. The modifications had been partially reversed, but the scars remained. "I keep having this feeling," she told me one evening, "like there's something you're not telling me, something important." I could have lied. The non-disclosure agreement was still binding, and Sarah's memories of the modification process were fragmentary at best. I could have let her believe she'd had some kind of breakdown, some inexplicable psychological episode that we'd gotten through together. Instead, I told her everything. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing more horrified with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "You erased me," she said finally. "You literally erased who I was and replaced me with someone you liked better." "I know. And you lived with that person. You made love to that person. You let that person tell you she loved you, knowing it wasn't real." "Yes. For weeks, David. You watched them delete pieces of my personality, and you were happy about it. I couldn't deny it, couldn't minimize it, couldn't explain it in a way that made me look like anything other than the monster I'd become. I thought I wanted you to be perfect," I said. "I thought that would make us happy. Perfect for you. Not perfect as a human being, but perfect as your accessory." "Sarah, No." She held up a hand. "I need to understand this. You signed a contract to have my personality surgically altered without telling me the full extent of what that meant. You watched them take away my relationship with my sister, my ability to disagree with you, my capacity for surprise and independence. And you did all of this because you thought it would improve our marriage. I was wrong. You were evil." She said it simply, without anger, which somehow made it worse. "You committed a kind of rape, David. You violated the most intimate part of who I am." I had no defense because she was absolutely right. In my narcissistic pursuit of perfect love, I had destroyed the very thing I claimed to cherish. I had turned the woman I married into a reflection of my own desires, and when that reflection had started to horrify me, I had tried to undo my crime without considering the permanent damage I'd inflicted. Sarah was looking at me now, with eyes that held flickers of both her original self and the artificial devotion the algorithm had programmed. She was a palimpsest, a person partially erased and imperfectly restored, forever changed by my inability to love her as she actually was. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said. "I don't know if I should even try." "I understand. Do you? Because I don't think you do. I remember fragments of being that other person, the one you created. I remember loving you with this perfect, uncomplicated devotion, and it felt real to me then. But it wasn't real, was it? It was just code, just programming designed to make you happy." She stood up, pacing to the window where I'd seen her standing in that moment of perfect emptiness. "The worst part is that I can feel it still," she continued. "Pieces of that artificial love, mixed in with my real feelings. I look at you, and I feel this programmed affection alongside my genuine horror at what you've done. I don't know which emotions are authentically mine anymore. I wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, to promise that we could work through this together, but I had forfeited the right to offer comfort. I was the source of her anguish, not its solution." "What happens now?" I asked. Sarah turned from the window, and I saw in her face the woman I had married complicated, unpredictable, gloriously human overlaid with the shadow of what I had temporarily made her into. "I don't know," she said. "I honestly don't know if there's an us anymore, or just the ghost of us, and the echo of a love that you had artificially manufactured." She walked past me toward the bedroom, then paused at the doorway. "I'm going to stay with Emma for a while. I need to remember who I am when I'm not being observed by the person who tried to rewrite me." I nodded, understanding that this was both merciful and just. She could have destroyed me, reported the company, sued for damages, told the world what I had done. Instead, she was giving me the gift of facing my own monstrosity in private. After she left, I sat in our empty house, surrounded by the detritus of our modified life books arranged according to my preferences, meals she had cooked to my exact specifications, a home organized around my comfort and convenience. The algorithm had worked perfectly, giving me everything I thought I wanted while destroying everything I actually needed. I had learned the most terrifying lesson possible: that love, real love, cannot be improved or optimized or perfected. It can only be chosen, again and again, with full acceptance of its beautiful, chaotic, imperfect humanity. And I had chosen to destroy it rather than learn to live with it. Whether Sarah would ever come back, whether forgiveness was possible, whether love could survive its own artificial resurrection, these were questions I would have to live with, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. I was alone with my perfect, empty house, and the devastating knowledge of what I had done to obtain it. The company's follow-up surveys went unanswered. Dr. Vance's calls went unreturned. I had become something worse than their failed experiment. I had become their unwitting accomplishment, a man who had gotten exactly what he deserved.